Good morning. I call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee meeting to order, and we will begin with introductions. I would like to remind everyone to ensure that your phones are on silent, and I'm going to do the same with mine, so that we don't have interruptions. We'll start with introductions, beginning with Mr. McKay.
Hugh McKay, Chester St. Margaret's.
Bill Horn, Waverley Fall River Beaverbank. Benjamin Jessam, Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Good morning, Suzanne Lonis-Croft, Lunenburg.
Morning, Gordon Wilson, Clare Digby.
Good morning, welcome. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
Good morning, Dave Wilson, MLA for Sackville Cobequid.
And hello, I'm Lisa Roberts, MLA for Halifax Needham.
We have representation from the Auditor General's office. We'll begin with Ms. Dickey.
Emily Dickey, Auditor General's office.
Hi, Michael Pickup, Auditor General, and with me to my left is Emily, one of our new audit principals who will be doing audits, including in the area of education. That's why she's with me today.
Thank you. And our guests, we'll just begin on the right here with Ms. Huntington.
Janet Lynn Huntington, Executive Director of the Early Years Branch.
Sandra McKenzie, Deputy Minister, Education and Early Childhood Development.
Vicki Elliott Lopez, Executive Lead for Child Care and Licensing.
David Potter, Director of Financial Services.
And Ms. McKenzie, you can now begin with opening remarks. Our topic today is pre-primary funding for pre-primary. So begin with Ms. McKenzie.
Okay. So thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all about pre-primary. And I was going to say I have some colleagues with me today, but you've already met them. I would like to say that I'm extremely proud of the people that I work with. They've done yeoman service over the course of the summer, and we've had 818 children that have been able to, over the course of this week, enter pre-primary, and it's due to a lot of work in the staff, at the board level, at the with our partners, and I know that the Minister shares my pride in the effort that's gone on. Earlier this week, Minister Churchill announced that 52 classrooms in 45 locations across the province will welcome more than 800 four-year-olds to pre-primary. This is the beginning of a 4-year journey that will end when pre-primary is available in every community to every family in Nova Scotia with a pre-primary age child. The introduction of this program is a major policy change that speaks to the value that Nova Scotians place on the importance of early learning. Pre-primary changes the landscape of early learning in our province, and it's a program we believe will help our children be more successful in their school years. We think everyone should have access to that opportunity. High-quality early childhood education programs are a benefit to all children, and those coming from vulnerable circumstances are most positively impacted. The evidence is compelling. Decades of early years research has shown that early exposure to high-quality early learning can make a significant positive impact on a child's later school and life. Short-term benefits include improved cognitive development, increased social skills, improved health and well-being, and higher self-esteem. There are other persuasive reasons for implementing a universal pre-primary program across our province. Significant numbers of children are vulnerable in Nova Scotia, and we can talk more about that in the course of our conversation this morning. High-quality early learning programs are cost-effective and provide short and long-term benefits. School-based early learning programs level the playing field. We want to build a strong foundation for learning in the early years, and to do so in a safe and caring, play-based environment that promotes the physical, social, emotional, and cognitive development of all children. I'm proud of what we've done to help children and families in Nova Scotia. As a result of the Early Intervention Service Review in 2014, we eliminated wait lists for early childhood development intervention services by expanding the services and improving access through additional 9 locations. We were able to reach 500 more children with special needs across the province. These early intervention services not only support children and families in their home, they also support families and children in pre-primary, as well as through the transition to grade primary. As a result of the 2015 review of regulated childcare, we committed to the implementation of 27 actions to improve childcare in Nova Scotia. For the first time in Nova Scotia, we have a comprehensive childcare plan that will create high-quality, affordable care for Nova Scotia families. We've improved wages for ECEs and are about to roll out the province's first early learning curriculum framework. We've also made significant investments to our subsidy program, making childcare more accessible for many Nova Scotia families. Pre-primary is a natural evolution of our work to ensure that all children and families get the supports they need that will enable success in P-12 and in life. Early learning programs are a powerful tool towards giving all our children an opportunity to prosper and live fulfilling lives. This is the right thing to do for our children, our families, and for our society. Thank you, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Houston of the PC Caucus, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opening comments. I think over the last year, it's really come to light how much instability there is in the school system. There's a lot of people frustrated, a lot of families frustrated by a lack of supports for their children that are already in the school system. So I think it took a lot of Nova Scotians by surprise to see that the possible solution to that was to add more out of the system, to add another year, to add pre-primary when the P-12 system is broken in many respects. Whose idea was it to add pre-primary, and when did the idea first surface, to your knowledge?
Ms. McKenzie.
So I would say that over the last decade, there has been a focus on the early years in Nova Scotia to ensure that children have a successful start in life, right from the beginning of the introduction of Read to Me 15 years ago, actually, to the, which is to set children off on a course of early learning, to the investments the government has made in EIBI to make sure that children are being early identification through to early intervention, to the family resource centers we have. There's been a focus on early years. The One Nova Scotia report asked us to focus on the early years, and the We Choose Now asked us to look at early years, and that effort was led by Gaynor Watson Creed. So we knew that we had to strengthen the childcare sector, which has been done, and we can speak to the efforts that have been made there, but also to make sure that through the efforts that we were taking a look at in the early years centers, which we've been piloting over the last few years with a partnership with the McCain Foundation, to take a look at expanding that service.
Thank you. All those. There's lots of good programs, but now we're adding something completely new, and the timing is just pretty surprising to me that it was added this year. So I guess what I would say is, first question is, are all the in-classroom positions filled as we sit here today? Have you been properly staffed up?
The staffing has been taken care of, and they will be opening this week, yes.
Okay. And in some boards, there's a bit of a veil of secrecy around who's been hired. The positions aren't all posted all the time. Are you aware of any of those kind of HR issues as to?
I'm not aware of any HR issues. I know that people were in the process of finalizing the reference checks and making sure people had their vulnerable sector check and closing off those final pieces, but we're really excited that the boards worked as hard as they did to get the staff into place.
And the staff is all in place today, as of today?
The staff will be in place as they open this week.
Okay, so not quite, but they will be.
Well, I would say that, yes, they know who they're hiring. Yeah.
They're opening, as they're open this week today. Is it today that they're opening?
They're opening through the course of the next few days, but Jael can speak to that.
Okay. Just on the staffing, though. The staff is all hired now or will be hired by the end of the week.
Ms. Huntington?
That's correct.
Okay. What's the actual objective of this pre-primary program? Is it to save money for families, or is it more on to improve the level of education?
Ms. McKenzie.
So I'm going to speak to that very briefly, and I'm going to tie it back to the question that you asked earlier, which is why do this program now when we are experiencing some of the troubles that we've experienced over the last year? What we know are that there's been two very important steps taken. Teachers said that children were arriving at school and they were concerned about the vulnerabilities they showed. We know that through the early development indicator data, which tells us that children, particularly in certain areas, are arriving with one or more vulnerabilities. The other thing that the government has done is establish the Inclusion Commission, which is taking a look at the model. JL will be able to speak to the research that points to early learning and pre-primary as being a significantly important first step for children as they move into the education system, and particularly of children of low socioeconomic experience.
Ms. Huntington?
So the research is clear, and it's there's decades and decades of research to talk about the benefits of pre-primary. And I'm going to refer to our neighbors in Ontario. So Ontario has a full-day kindergarten program, and they did an evaluation, and they looked at the scores for the children that attended the full-day kindergarten.
Ms. Chair, if I may, I don't want to get into the merits. I was just wondering, is it the department's objective? Is it on the education side or the save family money side? Because I've been hearing both from the minister. So I guess I'm hearing today it's on the education side, and you have all kinds of analysis that you can support that, I guess. And I don't want to dispute the merits of that research for today. But so if I'm hearing from the department that the main objective of the department is to introduce this program at this stage to improve the level of education of children, then I'm happy with that answer. Is that the objective?
Ms. McKenzie, can you clarify for Mr. Houston?
We are the education department, so clearly we want children to have the best possible start at education, but we also know that children don't get an even start in life, and we know that children that may live in poverty, having access to a program that is free of charge to the parents, that will give them a leg up. So yes, I think there's a balance on both sides of that. We're interested in making sure that children that don't have the same opportunities have that opportunity, and this is what this program has provided.
Okay. Okay, and just in terms of, since you touched on the equal opportunity and stuff, the department is using the catchment area of a school for who's eligible to attend. Is that the position of the department, or is that a board decision?
Ms. McKenzie?
I'm going to ask a gentleman to respond to that.
Ms. Huntington?
So the department is working with school boards, but we worked with school boards to come up with the plan that right now it would be based on catchment only. We know some school boards may look at that in the future if enrollment is low. It will be a school board decision, and it could also be a decision varies by the school, right? So if they're already at maximum capacity, they would not be able to go outside of catchment, and many classes are. So it's really going to be a school by school decision, and it will be a decision that is school board based.
So some classrooms are oversubscribed?
No.
There's none that are oversubscribed?
No, if there was an additional if there was more than 24 children, we added an additional space or made sure there was an additional space to accommodate those children.
Okay, so what's the class that has the most kids? How many are in the most?
So the maximum would be 24 in a class. That we would allow.
Is there some that are at 24?
Yes.
Is there any that are over 24?
There's no class that has more than 24 children. They would have to have an additional space so that we would, if there was 26 children, we would separate the groups and put them in additional space in the school. So,
okay. What's the smallest class you have?
I believe it's around 5 at this point.
So you have a class with 5 people in it? 5
pre-primary students.
Yeah.
We are expecting, as the program rolls out, that more children will attend. That has happened in the future through the early year center, so we know that some parents wait to see if the program is up and running, and then they will enroll their children sort of mid-year. So we expect that to happen in some classes as well.
So continuous enrollment, or at certain?
Yes, absolutely.
So okay, so continuous enrollment. Okay, so there's a lot of. It just seemed like a bit of a rush to get this going in terms of the staffing, in terms of the space. I hear about a daycare for special needs children that had to be moved out, and I think in terms of the space, as far as I understood the department's position was that they would only use available space, and yet I hear about a daycare getting kind of evicted. Was that considered available space, or what happened there?
Ms. McKenzie.
Is your reference to the school in Halifax?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was no one evicted there. The intention was never to have anyone evicted. What we were looking to do is make sure that children in the area got a great start. There was a higher than expected enrollment. We needed to have 2 classes instead of 1. The community worked together. The board worked very closely with the association, and I'm pleased to say that everybody will be housed in the building, and people are pleased with the space allocation as it is. So there was nobody put out.
Okay, so it was resolved. Okay, it was resolved.
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you. So does every classroom have a bathroom in it?
Ms. Huntington?
No.
Is that okay?
Yeah, so we, just like regulated childcare centers, not every classroom has a bathroom in a regulated childcare classroom. We know that the early childhood educators will work with the children to ensure that they're able to use the bathroom in a safe way, and we have confidence that they can help support them in those issues and make sure the children are able to use the bathroom in a safe environment.
Mr. Speaker.
Ms. McKenzie.
Mr. Chair. I just would like to add that we actually have 78 regulated childcare centres that currently exist in schools now that are safely using facilities. So we have confidence in the people that are working with the children to ensure their safety.
Thank you. Do you have a number as to how many EAs were in the school system that have now moved over to pre-primary?
In terms of hiring, who was hired, I don't have that. We do know that there are EAs in the system that are qualified early childhood educators that may have applied for the jobs. I do know that those EAs, if vacancies existed, have been backfilled in the boards. But I can ask JL if she knows if specifically an answer to that question.
Ms. Huntington?
No, I don't have an answer of a number of ECEs that took early childhood education positions, but I do know that they have credentials and they applied for these opportunities.
Okay, and then the important part that I'm most interested in was that they've been backfilled, because I do hear like there's a lot of children in the school system that don't have adequate support. I hear from families all the time that are concerned about the level of support that their children are getting in the P to 12 system. And I just read this morning about a child that went missing at school. A family was quite concerned that the supports aren't there for their child in the school system. So, and then with that in my mind, I hear that EAs are moving jobs or whatever and advancing their own careers and moving into the pre-primary system. But it's creating more stress on the P to 12 system. But you're saying that those positions have all been backfilled. The department's not aware of any less EAs in the school system because of this?
Ms. McKenzie?
So thank you for asking that. I know that there's been some people that have equated the hiring of the ECEs and whether or not we have enough EAs in the system. I think the minister said it well when he said that we've in fact increased the number of EAs in the public school system. What teachers told us last year when they lined up at the mic is that the current model, there's no, the need is outstripping the current resources, and that's why we've established an inclusion commission, which is going to look at the model to see how we can work best in Nova Scotia to provide those supports for children, and that the consultation will be underway this fall, and the Premier and the Minister have asked for that report to be tabled by March, so we can be making sure that after 20 years we have a new model that we can move to, because we know that there's been increases in the level of autism, for instance, and what we want to make sure is that we've designed our education system to support children have good outcomes.
Yeah, I guess that really speaks to the crux of the whole matter is that people are concerned about the existing system and the need is outstripping the resources. And I don't know that anyone anticipated that a possible solution to that was going to be to add another year to the school system when the P to 12 system is under so much stress. Like that's really, this isn't solving the need, what you heard from teachers last year, what I heard from teachers last year, this isn't in any way addressing that. It's actually making it worse in many ways.
So I currently co-chair the Council on Classroom Conditions. I work closely with our representative on the Inclusion Commission. I traveled around the province and met with 378 principals, and I can tell you that they do see early learning and pre-primary as important steps in supporting children in moving into school and addressing some of the challenges that children are presenting with when they move into the classroom. So this is part of the solution, looking at the model, and that's how we presented it. Pre-primary is part of the solution, but an important part of the solution, and it's endorsed by the educators that I speak to, and certainly we have principals that have early years centres in the system that can speak poetically about how the positive effect it's had on the children that have been moving out of the early years centres into the class, into primary this year. So I would say that this is part of the solution. We absolutely agree that we need to look at the current model, and that's why the Inclusion Commission has been put in place by this government. And
the existing network of daycare systems and early, is it not cutting it in your opinion? Like this is, like there's already a network out there. And this decision, in many ways, people are saying is going to have a negative impact on that network that exists. Did you speak to any of those people? Who did you consult with when this was first introduced? Is there any kind of analysis that the department has done on the impact on the existing network of daycares and early learning providers and stuff? There's going to be an impact on them. Has the department looked at that?
So we're about to launch a consultation with the sector. We have been working very closely with the sector. This government invests $55 million a year in the childcare sector and was the first government to introduce an increase in wages that brought people up to a living wage and honored the work of the ECEs in the system. They also have increased subsidy for families, and we've been negotiating with the federal government on further investment. We also know, though, that only 25% of children that are that can access childcare are accessing childcare. It could be for a variety of reasons, which could be that there's no childcare available in their community. So the objective here is to not only invest in the childcare sector, invest in pre-primary, but there's going to be the consultation which links the childcare sector into how we can do wraparound services. This is about abundance. There's going to be lots of space for people to work.
I think you answered my question when you said the consultations will start later, because that's really what's happening here, is that there's so many moving parts, and to start a consultation after this has been introduced is why we're seeing some of the concern that we are seeing for sure. So no assessment of the impact on the existing network yet, but will be in the future. So $55 million being spent into that system now. I mean, it could have been a decision to spend a little more, spend this money on that system and improve that system that already works for families. You know, you're trying to. So it doesn't jive with me. So there will be an impact on that system for sure, and we don't know what it is yet.
So I guess I'm saying that I think there'll be a positive impact as we work with them. And I just
so what do you say then to, sorry, I know I'm just a little short on time, Mr. Chair there, but what do you say to the people? I hear a very reasoned argument that this is taking 4-year-olds out of that system, and it's leaving a lot of places that they're not going to be able to survive because they're losing their clients, right? They're losing their customers, the children they're working with. So it's gonna decrease the availability, especially for the kids that are newborns to 3 years old, because there's nothing for them. So this is taking 4-year-olds out of an existing system that works and is well funded by the government, $55 million, and is putting it at jeopardy. But that's not being considered as part of this. You haven't done an impact assessment on what will be the availability for children under 4, right? That hasn't been looked at.
We actually have continued to work with the sector all the way through this, and we are going to do the consultation on what the opportunities are for wraparound services into the future. This will actually provide spaces for the 0 to 4-year-olds, and I believe...
Will provide spaces in the school system?
It opens up spaces, and I'm going to turn it over to Jael. I think she's going to respond.
Ms. Huntington?
So I also want to point out that we will be launching, at the same time that we do a consultation with childcare providers, we will be launching a consultation with families. And I think this is really important and speaks to your point. We need to hear from families about what they need for childcare. So as the deputy pointed out, in lots of communities across Nova Scotia, there is not regulated childcare. So this family survey that we're going to be consulting families on shortly will ask families directly, what kind of care do you need? What kind of service regulated childcare do you need? And we as a government will take that answer and try to support the needs of the families and provide that service.
That's a great idea. I don't understand why you're doing it after. Like, that's the type of thing that should be done beforehand. So great that it's being done. I don't understand the timing.
So we committed in the regulated childcare plan announced in June 2016 that we would open childcare centres in communities that needed it most. And so this is part of not only in response to pre-primary, but also our commitments in the childcare plan to work with families and providers to make sure that families have access to services that they need in their community. So that is a follow-up to that, and the information that we receive from that consultation will be shared with childcare providers so they're able to respond to needs.
Is that how you pick the initial locations? Because they don't have existing regulated childcare?
That was one consideration for many communities, yes.
Okay, so all those communities that don't have prior to this regulated childcare, they now have pre-primary?
So some communities where pre-primary is being implemented do have access to regulated childcare, but as the deputy indicated, we know that not all families access regulated childcare, and there's not enough spaces to provide care for all children birth to 5 in Nova Scotia.
Okay. Speaking about the access and stuff, the busing is a big, the timing it's really tough for families to get off work and go pick up their child, but busing's not an option here. Why not?
Ms. McKenzie, you have 5 seconds.
Thank you for the question.
Okay. We will move to the NDP caucus. Just for the benefit of our witnesses, I do recognize people before they speak when they've not spoken before. Just so we can make sure your mic is on. So I won't recognize you every time, but if there's a change from one speaker to another, I will recognize the new speaker, just if you're wondering what I'm doing. We'll move to Ms. Roberts of the NDP caucus for 20 minutes.
Thank you. In 2016, as part of the review and the consultation that happened with the childcare sector, I understand that 7,000 people completed a survey, including families and childcare providers. So why are we not working from that consultation, instead implementing a program that did not come out of that consultation, and then we're going back to ask them again what their needs are? Explain that.
Ms. McKenzie?
So the survey that we did on the childcare sector was specifically to childcare. What JL has just spoken to is we're looking at the childcare sector and what people needed. The survey that JL is speaking about is to support the growth strategy that came out of the strategy that evolved from that original survey. So are there additional questions we need to ask now that we have a childcare strategy in place? There is. And JL, you may want to speak to what the direction of that survey in a little bit more clear.
Ms. Huntington?
So we know some families, particularly in rural Nova Scotia, may only need seasonal care or part-time care. We made a commitment in the child care plan as a result of that consultation that you referred to, that we would open child care centres in communities that need it most. And child care operators were really clear with us on that. Please do not fund 4 childcare centres within a 2-kilometre radius of each other if we know that a childcare centre is needed somewhere else. So we heard loud and clear from families and from childcare operators that they wanted us to be more strategic on where and when we open childcare centres. So we know that childcare centres do their own analysis of what type of care they should provide, but we also know that families have unique circumstances, and we're in a really unique position in Nova Scotia that we are entering into federal negotiations with the Government of Canada now, and strategic growth will be a priority using those dollars. So we need to have intimate conversations with families about what type of care they need. Is it wraparound? Is it care for 4-year-olds that are finished at the end of the day of a pre-primary and they need somewhere to go till 6 o'clock? Is it seasonal care? Is it just in the summer? These are conversations that families will be able to tell us specifically in their region by postal code. And that's information that we're going to gather and we're going to share with childcare providers so that they're able to respond to the needs of families in their community.
So just to understand that more, in my particular district, within a 1 kilometer radius of 2 new pre-primary classrooms, there are 3 childcare centers, including a dedicated preschool. So that consultation in terms of what was needed where was not done before this pre-primary rollout. Is that correct? Do I understand that?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, sorry. Sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry. So we know that none of the childcare centers in your community have been have closed because of pre-primary, and we know that now families will be able to send their child to the pre-primary program. And we also know that some families can only afford sort of part-day care, send their child in the morning. So in this case, when there's a pre-primary program in a community and a regulated childcare program in the community, families, especially families with multiple children, will be able to perhaps extend the day, perhaps use the dollars that they would be saving by sending their older child to pre-primary to send their younger child to full-day wraparound service. So these are all options that we are going to be working with families and childcare providers to ensure that the care is provided for the kids that need it.
Okay. If the emphasis of this program is on improving outcomes, particularly for families and children coming from lower socioeconomic conditions, will the department be able to report on the demographics of the families who do access the program?
Do you mean
Ms. McKenzie?
Sorry. Are you asking, are we going to be surveying the family in terms of their income and their that's an excellent piece of research that we could undertake. There isn't a means test now to come in, so people are not applying based on an income level, but we certainly have taken a look at the communities where we've placed the pre-primary, but the intention is to have it available across the province.
Okay. Our office filed access to information requests for records, including studies, plans, strategy, objectives for the addition of the pre-primary sites, anything from January 1st until May 2nd of 2017. And the department responded that there were no records responsive to the application. And we also asked for records showing how much the new program would cost. And again, the response was that there were no records. Can you explain how decisions were made about the costing and implementation of the program if the department had not done that background work that we asked to look at?
The work that we had done is on the early years centres, and what we knew is that they were successful. The Liberal government took a look at the success with the early years centres, the recommendations that had been made through Gaynor Watson Creed's group that worked for the We Are the Now report. We've looked at research from across the country as part of the McCain partnership, and there was a decision that was made to move forward with this program. And we have costed it based on the early years centres that were currently in place, and are rolling that out. And in many ways, we built on the experience we had with the early years centres. Do you want to add anything to that?
In your experience of opening early years centers, how long was the timeline typically between identifying a site and opening a site?
I'll let JL respond to that.
Ms. Huntington.
So I actually don't have that information at hand. I wasn't the executive director at the time when we opened early years centers, but we know, I mean, the reality is when you're opening a pre-primary program, we had really good a really good foundation to build the pre-primary program on. So we've been doing early year centers in Nova Scotia since 2014. So some of the decisions that you would normally have to make when implementing a program as quickly as we had to, we already had those answers. We already had the decisions. And the other thing is we have an evaluation of the early year centers. So we know what's working and we know what wasn't working. And so we took all that into consideration when we were developing the program for pre-primary.
Ms. McKenzie has a comment, I believe.
I think if the question is, did we move quickly? We did. And if you would look at how we moved out with the earlier centers, it probably took a longer period of time because we were working with the McCain Foundation and putting the research in place. But I can say when the opportunity came to be able to roll out a universal pre-primary program in Nova Scotia, something that the staff in our division have said that they've dreamed about for 30 years, we moved quickly. It was because we're ambitious for our children. There's 818 kids that would have had the opportunity this year, have the opportunity because we were ambitious and because we moved quickly. But in moving quickly, we also know that we have opportunities to work with the childcare sector. They're leaning in terms of participating in this consultation that's coming up, and I believe that we're going to have a strengthened system into the future and children that will have a better start at life.
Again, thank you for your answer. We filed another access to information request related to the selection of the sites for the pre-primary classrooms. And in that package, there was an email from a staff person from June 15th that said there has been no direction given to schools re-pre-primary, and at this time we have no information re-pre-primary. So recognizing that you move fast and that you saw this as an opportunity, how were the sites selected and announced by July 18th if there was no information on June 15th?
I can say that as soon as our minister was in place, we were off to the races. We worked with the school boards. They were amazing. And I'll turn it over to JL, but it was a very quick turnaround time. This was an opportunity that the school boards saw, and they went with it as quickly as they could.
Ms. Huntington?
That's correct. So we worked with the school boards daily. We asked them questions like where was their space, where would they prefer to have a pre-primary site, and what we could do given the tight time frame that we were given. So they were able to respond quickly, and I use the example of one superintendent who literally got in his car and drove around to the elementary schools to see what would be the best sites and where he could put a pre-primary program in for September. So when he called me on that Friday afternoon, he said, I've personally visited the sites myself. I'm very comfortable with the list that we've put forward, and they were able to respond as quickly as possible. And we looked at things like space as well as where there was need, so where there was limited or lack of regulated childcare in communities, for example.
Will the pre-primary classes be having outdoor play as part of their regular curriculum?
Absolutely.
So in my neighborhood, for example, where there are two pre-primary classes at a school just up the hill, it does not have a fenced playground. What measures are you taking to ensure that you don't have 4-year-olds, 24 of them running in possibly 8 different directions in an environment that would not be considered safe in a regulated preschool program?
So we know that early childhood educators have expertise and experience in child development. We know that they will use outdoor play as much as they can to teach the children. That's how they learn, through play. Oftentimes what we've discovered is that with regulated childcare and even with school playgrounds, children don't necessarily need a play structure, but they need access to outdoor play. So it could be anything from going into a little into the woods behind the childcare center to explore what's happening in nature. The early childhood educators are trained and highly qualified to be able to make sure that children are safe at all times. They will use whatever resources they can outside to teach the children, whether it's a tree or a little patch of grass or whatever's available outside to use, whether it's hiking or walking. These are the things that happen every day in early learning environments in Nova Scotia, and will continue to happen now that we have pre-primary.
But is there any plan to change the regulations where preschools operating in regulated childcare environments are required to have a fully fenced playground?
So I would remind you that in many regulated childcare centers, it's not just 4-year-olds, right? So it could be 1, 2, 3, and children after school as well. So when it comes to regulations, I know, and Vicki can jump in here, but we're always looking at the branch to ensure that our regulations are up to date and reflective of meeting the needs of the childcare center and of the families and children that they serve. So that is something that we could possibly look at. Vicki, do you have anything to add?
Did you have something to add? Okay, okay.
So just in short, you're confident that these pre-primary children are going to be safe in the playgrounds and in the play spaces surrounding the elementary schools where they're located?
I'm confident that children attending pre-primary will be safe because they have highly trained, qualified early childhood educators that will work with them every day to keep them safe.
In 2010, PEI began to move some children out of regulated childcare centers and into the school system. And when the government realized the problems that they were creating for existing childcare providers, the province stopped and started over. What has the department done to learn from PEI's experience?
Ms. McKenzie?
So Prince Edward Island actually moved to a fully new model of childcare, which involved buying out certain commercial providers and made some significant changes in their overall system, which also still includes childcare sector, the childcare provision in the public school system. I don't know that they ever undertook a universal pre-primary program the way that we did. We're certainly looking at models that they had in Ontario and in the Northwest Territories, and if there's anything that the two of you would like to add to that, okay.
So, in your obviously your rushed timeline, did you have time, and were you able to give the minister advice based on the experiences of Ontario and PEI, and what did that look like? When did those conversations happen?
We've been imagining what pre-primary would look like for some time because we had the experience with our early years centers. We've had early learning classes, ELOs happening in the Halifax School Board for some time. We've had 4+ programs. We were able to build it on our own experience in terms of how we would extend that out. And then it was informed by other people's experiences, both in highly urban settings like Toronto would have through to places like the Northwest Territories where they're distance covered. So we were able to build on our own experiences with pre-primary and learn from others as well.
Then how do you explain that when we asked for, through access to information, asked for records of some of that conversation and work within the department, there were no records that came back to us?
So I'm in the time frame that you're asking, the commitment that was made in the budget leading up to the election is that we would move forward with pre-primary. We had many conversations with Minister Casey about the strength of our early years centers, the strength of our early learning, the experiences that we had with the 4+ programming. And it was when, after the election, that was confirmed that we would be moving forward with pre-primary that we moved forward with a fully developed program.
Pre-primary programs only operate during school hours on days when school is in session, and that means the program is not accessible to working parents. Is the department concerned about that?
Ms. Huntington?
So we know that there will be families in Nova Scotia that will not be able to use the pre-primary program, but we are pleased that we have over 800 that are accessing the program this year. So families will make arrangements that will suit their needs, whether they can have their child picked up by a grandparent or a neighbor, those types of things, whether they can send their child to a regulated childcare center for after-school care so that they can make the pre-primary program work. We know families are really excited about this program. We're hearing that all the time. They're pleased that their children children can attend. We will, it's important for us to be looking at those types of issues that you just raised over the next 4 years. The ultimate goal is to have ensure access for every 4-year-old in Nova Scotia. And so as we roll out this program, we will be learning lots of new things about access and making sure that we can accommodate families and their needs. And if that means partnering with a regulated childcare to provide that wraparound service, that's something that we want to explore. This program will be universal. It will be accessible to all 4-year-olds in 4 years. And we really want to work with families to make sure that it works for them as well.
Is there a site where arrangements for after-school care have actually been made for this September? Is there a case that you can point to where parents are actually able to access regulated after-school care connected, to pick up after school?
Ms. McKenzie?
I should have mentioned earlier in the experiences that we've had, and in answer to the question that you've just asked, our Francophone School Board, CSAP, has been offering pre-primary for a number of years. And they partner regularly with private providers to provide wraparound care in the morning and after school. So we have models that we're going to be able to provide to the current sector to show them how that works. So that's why I'm saying I think there's opportunity here. So and to the point that you raised earlier, those are working parents that are using that. They're able to drop the children off in the morning. They receive wraparound service. They move into pre-primary, which is free of charge to them. And then they move straight into after-school care, all in the same setting. And the providers, it's seamless to the families. So it is supportive of working parents. So I'm quite excited by that. And that's some of the models we want to discuss with the childcare sector in the rest of the province. And
in terms of these new sites, so as you mentioned, the CSAP has been offering pre-primary in its schools for the past number of years. Do we have any example of a new pre-primary site where similar wraparound service has been made available this year?
Ms. Huntington?
We do know that one school board is looking to work with childcare providers in their local community to offer that service now. So they're putting the sort of the finishing touches on how they would go about approaching a regulated childcare center to offer that wraparound service. The other thing I would like to mention is that in the earlier centers, we do know that that service has been provided in the past, and in some earlier centers, when we asked if they wanted wraparound regulated childcare services, it wasn't a priority for families. We discovered that through the evaluation. So in some communities, absolutely, families will want that after school care and that wraparound service, but in some communities, there will not be a need for it.
Thank you.
Okay, time is just about to expire. Thank you, Ms. Roberts. We'll move to the Liberal Caucus. Ms. Lonis-Croft, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to have you here. It's no secret I'm an early childhood educator and proud of it. The topic today is funding for pre-primary, and I don't think we really got into discussion about the funding. So could you explain where this money is coming from? Is it new money? Are you taking from one pot for another pot? And how will this program be funded?
Ms. McKenzie?
Thank you. I'll give a very high level, and then I'm going to turn it over to JL and to David, who is our Director of Finance, for the response. But we have taken the money that we had, $1.5 million, for the early years centers and the supports that we had. There was an additional 3.7 that was given in the spring budget, and an additional 8, bringing us to $6 million. 4.5 of that is new money in the budget for these centers. It's budgeted at about $125,000 a program. And what we've discovered as we've moved through this is that $125,000 for the startups will cover the 6 months for the fiscal year from September to March, and startup costs for the materials for the classroom, and hiring the staff and including the supports at the board. So if there's anything that JL would add to that, or David.
Mr. Potter.
No, I think the deputy captured everything. Really, the total investment is $6 million. As she mentioned, you'll see budget announcements of 4.5. That's the new investment. The 1.5 of existing funds that existed for the earlier centers is being repurposed as those centers convert to pre-primary centers.
Okay, so you mentioned that you took money from the early years program. Have all of the early years programs been closed?
Ms. Huntington?
So the Early Years Center model has 3 components. One of them is early learning. So that early learning component will transition into pre-primary, so there'll be no difference there. Early Years Centers also offer supports to families and communities, and in some cases they offer regulated childcare as well. So we are not abandoning the idea of Early Years Centers. We know that those centers are valuable to the community, and right now our focus is on pre-primary. However, the Early Years Center, 8 Early Years Centers that we have now will remain in place, and in the future, if there is a need to expand on the pre-primary and incorporate it into an early year center model. So for example, if we know that a community needs additional support, that's something that we will look at into the future. So early year centers will continue in Nova Scotia and possibly expand if there is a need.
Okay, thank you. So why do we need pre-primary in Nova Scotia, and why are they in schools?
So there's decades and decades of research that speak to the value of early learning opportunities for children. We know that children who attend pre-primary or a program before they start school do better socially, emotionally, and academically in the future. The research is clear on that. In Nova Scotia, we participate in the Early Development Instrument, so the EDI. That is a school readiness assessment that's done in grade primary. And it measures a child's development in 5 domains: physical health and wellness, emotional maturity, communication skills, cognitive development, and social competence. And we have had 2 rounds of EDI in Nova Scotia, one in 2013 and one in 2015. And the results of the EDI indicate that 1 in 4 children, so 25% of our children in Nova Scotia, arrive to school with vulnerable in at least one of those domains. We know in some populations and in some communities it can be as high as 50 to 60%. So that EDI results is really a call to action, if you will, to government and community, that we need to ensure that when our children arrive to school, they're ready to learn. The pre-primary program is going to help with that. The other thing that it does is, we've talked about this earlier this morning, that there is not regulated childcare in every community in Nova Scotia. There will be pre-primary for every Nova Scotia child. That really does level the playing field. This program it will be a game changer for Nova Scotia and for families. The other thing that I think it's important mentioning is, through our early year center evaluation, we were able to have conversations with parents about what they thought about their child attending this early year center, and did they see any improvements or growth and development in their child. And the results were clear. So moms and dads reported things like, my child speaks better language, better communication, better able to self-regulate their emotions. And I always love when parents report that they get along better with their siblings because they've attended the pre-primary program. So that's an added bonus for families. We know that having children attend pre-primary is also a great benefit if they haven't if they've gone undiagnosed for a special need. So early childhood educators in Nova Scotia are trained and highly qualified. If there is a child that enters pre-primary that does not have a diagnosis of a special need, that the ECE potentially has some questions and concerns, they will have conversations with families about that. They will work with families. They will work with community partners to ensure that those children have access to services the year before they start school. And that is a tremendous benefit that we can't forget. So those are some of the reasons why we need pre-primary in Nova Scotia, and it's a great opportunity for children and families, and in 4 years it's going to be a game changer, and we're already seeing the benefits of that now.
And they're located in schools because, like...
Sorry. We know schools are a great place for early learning opportunities and for pre-primary programs because they help with transitions. So I'm going to give you an example of a family that I met on Monday, actually, at the opening of the pre-primary program in Lower Sackville. So I was fortunate enough to meet a mom who has a child with autism. And that child is now at the pre-primary program at the school in Lower Sackville. And this mom has a new baby, so is a new mom, has a little infant at home. And she said to me, so isn't it, my son would only have access to a program twice a week for 3 hours a day. So that's 6 hours worth of programming. So the mom indicated to me, by the time she got up, got ready, got the child prepared, took the child to the program, dropped the child off, made sure the child was comfortable, it was time to turn around and go back and pick him up. So for her, this program allowed her her child to attend this program 5 days a week for the full length of the school year. And she just thought that was tremendous, because not only would it help him meet new friends and help with his language and development and his social emotional skills, it's going to help with transition into school. And that's why it's important that these programs are in schools. This child is going to walk into primary next year. He's going to know who the principal is. He's going to know where the washroom is. He's going to know he's going to have friends that he's met in pre-primary. So having it at a central focal point of a community school is a great idea to ensure transitions into the public school system are done and are successful.
And transitions are probably the most challenging thing for children with autism. So, okay, all right, I understand that now. I wanted to talk a little bit about Ms. McKenzie. You said that the pre-primary, you didn't finish the statement. You said that the pre-primaries will be positive for the existing education system. And I don't think you finished that, and I want to know why.
Ms. McKenzie?
You were saying that. I think JL just explained the positive nature. It's not only positive for the families and positive for the children. It's positive for the teachers that are receiving the children in grade primary. So the principal that in Yarmouth that hosted the Early Years Centre for the last 2 years has seen a tremendous readiness of the children that have gone through the Early Years Centre and moved into grade primary. And that they're saying that the things that the child may have struggled with when they moved into the public school system, many of those things the child's had the opportunity to address. There may have been self-regulation issues, or in some cases children haven't all been introduced to books, to being able to sit and attend, listen, those types of things. So they've had those opportunities, they developed those skills, they're ready to transition to the public school system, and primary teachers see the benefit of those kids moving into the classes. Thank you.
And I think as a former home and school president, I'd meet regularly with my principal, and I think his biggest comment has been when we say, how can we help you? What's your biggest issue? And I was always given, children are coming to school with lacking social skills, and often you can catch up on your academics as the year progresses, but it seems like social skills will be the big thing to, it deals with behavior. A lot of children are coming from homes where they don't have to wait, take turns, everything is instant gratification. So how much focus on social skills will be a part of this and problem solving?
So there's a play-based learning curriculum, and in fact that's been rolled out in a pilot with the childcare sector as well. And I'd like JL to speak to that. It's a first for Nova Scotia. We've built on the good experiences across Canada.
Ms. Huntington.
So the early learning curriculum framework that we've developed in Nova Scotia is something that we're really proud of. We were the last jurisdiction in Canada to have an early learning curriculum framework, but we actually think that was an opportunity for us. So we were able to look at curriculum frameworks for early learning from around the country and from around the world. And we really did build a document that reflects what we as Nova Scotians feel about children, and it's based on the image of the child. And the child is curious, creative, full of potential, capable, and confident. And that's woven throughout the entire document. And what that does is it sets early childhood educators up to ensure that a play-based inclusive curriculum is being offered in pre-primary and in regulated childcare centers. It's a document that if you look at the document, what you will not see in it is an outcomes-based document. So it's very different than a curriculum that you would see in grade 1 or grade 2. So child by 4 must do X. You will not see that. It's strategies and tips for early childhood educators to help those children, particularly the pre-primaries and the ones in regulated childcare, be the best 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds that they can be. And they do that through play, and that's woven throughout the entire document. And this is a document that we're really proud of. We've piloted this document with 40 childcare centers across Nova Scotia. They have been incredible in giving us valuable feedback on how to make improvements. The pre-primary program will use this document. We're expecting the pilot to wrap up in November, I believe, and we'll be making some additions and changes to it to improve it, but the foundation and the basis will not change. It's only going to get better from here. We're lucky that we have it, and we're really quite proud of it here.
So will that curriculum be used in early childhood programs across Nova Scotia, or just the pre-primary?
All provincially funded regulated childcare centers in Nova Scotia will use the early learning curriculum framework. So it's not just for 4-year-olds, it's for children from birth to 8, actually.
Okay. Ms. McKenzie, you mentioned that this program would reach Nova Scotia's most vulnerable children. Do you want to explain that? We just saw a poverty map come out last week, and we do see sections of Nova Scotia that I'm sure that's one of the vulnerabilities with our children here in Nova Scotia. Do you want to speak to that?
Ms. McKenzie?
Thank you. We know that there are children in Nova Scotia that live in families that are not accessing regulated childcare. We do have a very strong subsidy program, but they may live in areas where their regulated childcare isn't available. So by rolling out a universal pre-primary program, it's making it available to all children. And we will work hard over the coming years to make sure that that we've addressed access issues as they arise. We're committed to this being successful, as they are at the school boards as well. So I believe, as JL has just pointed out, that the program and the research points to this being a very positive thing for children, and we know that we have EDI scores that tell us that we need to move in this direction, and making it universally available to all 4-year-olds in the province is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I'm very interested in that. This is a great opportunity I see for early childhood educators. Their time has come. And, you know, for 30, 40 years, there have been the grandmothers mostly, because they've been women in these low-income positions, really advocating and telling the public, you know, that they are qualified and well-trained individuals, yet their pay never seemed to show that, or even the respect they got publicly. So seeing early childhood educators up front in this whole program. I understand each school board will have a higher level person, sort of a consultant or whatnot. Can you explain that role as opposed to the in-classroom ECEs?
Ms. McKenzie?
Jen Lynn would be the person to answer that.
Okay.
Ms. Huntington?
So each school board will have a pre-primary lead or manager. They all have a variety of titles. And the school board, that individual will be responsible for working with the early childhood educators in the pre-primary classroom. Each pre-primary classroom will have a lead early childhood educator and a support early childhood educator. Both are ECEs, both have a very important role in the classroom. But for example, the lead ECE would be responsible for parental interaction. So if they were having challenges with a child, they would be responsible for working with the pre-primary lead in the board and with the family to help resolve those issues. So it's not that one is doing something different than the other, it's just the lead has a bit more accountability when it comes to dealing with community partners, so early intervention, for example, welcoming them to the school, or as well as with parents. So, but both early childhood educators play, you know, whether it's lead or support, an integral role in ensuring a high-quality, safe environment for children in the classroom.
Okay, so will there be professional development for these early childhood educators?
Absolutely. So we know that the pre-primary leads in the board have their own sort of individual professional development that they want to explore and work with their ECEs on. But in October, towards the end of October, we will have all early childhood educators that working in pre-primary come to a full day session, a professional development session on play-based learning and the early learning curriculum framework. So we know just through the evaluation of the early year centers that PD is a critical component to success. So we've taken that message. We've heard it loud and clear from early childhood educators, and so whenever we can respond to professional development opportunities, we will do so. The first one will be a full day session. We're really excited about it, to have all the ECEs from across the province together to walk them through best practice in play-based, and these folks are, these employees know play-based learning already. We're just introducing them to the early learning curriculum framework to make sure that they're set up for success. We will continue to have conversations with the pre-primary leads at the board to find out if there's other opportunities for professional development that they need, and we'll accommodate those PD opportunities whenever we can.
Oh, that's good to know. Are there, you know, when in the 1980s, I took part in a certification program. It was a pilot program for early childhood educators. And, you know, there were other organizations, the Preschool Association of Nova Scotia, and there's the Child Care Council. Will, you know, memberships in these organizations be important for these early childhood? I know they're personal decisions, but I think that attests to their professionalism in their own standing, right? So are there opportunities there?
Absolutely, and I've already had conversations with the board chair and the executive director of the Early Childhood Education Association of Nova Scotia, and we've talked about the opportunity here. So early childhood educators work in a variety of fields, whether it's developmental intervention, pre-primary, or regulated childcare. So there's opportunities through that association to not only encourage more ECEs to participate in that association, but for us to continue the good work that we do with the Child Care Association now to provide, for example, PD opportunities for ECEs, whether they're in pre-primary, early intervention, or regulated childcare. So absolutely there is a role, and we will continue to work with the Child Care Association that we have now, and hopefully they'll be able to recruit some more ECEs to their membership.
Okay. When someone comes in the morning, parents are dropping off their children, what's the transition to be like for these, you know, you have all these new 4-year-olds arriving on day one?
So a day in the life of pre-primary. So I'll just
can imagine.
Yeah, I'll just walk you through and recognize that each class is different, and each early childhood educator has their own ways of doing things. But families can expect children to be greeted by their ECEs. There will be an open snack provided, so a snack will be available, a healthy, nutritious snack will be available to children if they're hungry at that time. It will just be there. They don't have to ask for it. They can access it. It can be accessible.
I'm sorry, time has expired. We'd like to hear more about that, perhaps in the next round. We'll move to Mr. Houston at the PC Caucus for 14 minutes.
Thank you. The curriculum framework, is that accessible? Is that online? Where would I find the curriculum framework?
Ms. Huntington?
I can make sure that you have a copy. It's not available online because it was still a pilot, but okay. Absolutely we can get you a copy.
Thank you. That is the curriculum that's being used in the classrooms?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. In terms of the costing, we mentioned $125,000 per class as a startup cost. So is that the annual cost, $125,000 per class? Okay, so a class that has 5 kids in it?
No.
Ms. McKenzie, perhaps, right? Ms. McKenzie, perhaps you can, I think you nodded your head in agreement with that last answer, but just so that our answered services can pick up on the answer, perhaps you could vocalize it.
So I was shaking my head that it was $125,000 was a startup cost, and apologies to Hansard. It's actually the cost. We know that that's the cost of an early years program. This year, we have that allocated for the program, but obviously that varies depending on how many kids are in classes, whether there's a large class that needs 3 ECEs and a small class that needs 1. The point I was trying to make earlier is that normally the $125,000 would run for 9 months. It's running for 6 months, and we also used the remainder for startup costs. So I'll let JL speak to further budget, or let David jump in.
Well, I guess what I'd like to know is what's the cost, what's the budgeted cost per child for the 10 months for the school year?
Ms. McKenzie or Ms.
You'll do that.
Ms. Huntington?
We don't have a cost per child to attend. We have a cost per program. So we know that we provide funding in the tune of $125,000 for each class, as long as it has 2 early childhood educators. And it would have 2 early childhood educators if there was more than 10 children in the class, as well as if perhaps there was a child with children that identified as special needs that required additional resources. So we would provide funding through that.
So $125,000 per year, assuming that there's two early child educators in the class.
That's correct.
Okay, and how does that, on a per child basis, how does that compare to what's happening in the market already? Is this more expensive or less expensive?
Mr. Potter, do you wish to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, when you refer to the market, are you referring to the regulated childcare sector?
Yeah.
I don't know of any comparison between those two numbers. The $125,000 is the 10-month cost, and that's based on a standard approach of 2 ECEs per classroom, as well as the classroom supplies.
Okay, so nobody looked at, well, because to be blunt, what I hear a lot of the benefits of the program. The other side of that is the implication that there's inadequate services being provided by the regulated, like really, I mean, I see you're shaking your head no, but when you say, what I'm hearing is, we can do this so much better in the pre-primary system, and we're going to do it. And I see your expression is maybe you don't want me to get that impression, but that is the impression that I'm left with. And then when I think about, well, if we're comparing it that way, have we at least looked at, if it's really about accessibility for families, I don't think you have it. I really don't think you have it, because now they have to get their child to the school. They have to pick their child up, maybe take their child to after school daycare so they can go back to work. Like, there's just so many moving parts. It's just not there yet. And it's started, but it's not well thought out because it's not helping families. And then I hear, so that's the practical implications of the system, you know, with the materials aren't in the classrooms. My colleague mentioned the playgrounds aren't fenced. Well, we're going to rely on teachers to keep them safe, even though just more and more responsibility on them, because the system's not ready, because it was rushed. And then I say, well, at least maybe they did some financial analysis about value for money for the taxpayers, value for money for the families. And now I've just heard that wasn't done either. Deputy, maybe you can you, is there any, has nobody's looked at what families are paying now for childcare in the existing system and compared that to what the taxpayers are going to pay to start the pre-primary? That hasn't been looked at?
Ms. McKenzie?
We do have financials for the childcare sector, and we've been running early years, and we could do that calculation. Your point is that we haven't done it. What we know is that one is calculated by the child by age, and one has done for a 4-year-old program. So we're separating the two. And we have different funding levels by age for the childcare sector, and like I said, we have the 4-year-old program. But I just need to comment on a number of other things that you said. We will have all of the classes with equipment. We will have all of the classes with trained ECEs. We will have, even in the regulated childcare sector, they take children out for walks that are not inside fenced areas. We trust on the professionalism of ECEs to do that in regulated childcare all the time. The question that you've framed, though, is a scarcity approach, and I'm asking you to look at it from an abundance perspective. This is not saying that the childcare sector wasn't able to provide this service, and we're doing it so much better in pre-primary. We're saying we have a fantastic childcare sector that we've invested $55 million in. We've invested in early childhood educators in that sector for the first time. We've introduced improved subsidy, and we're going to have a pre-primary program, which that sector will be able to play a role in. It's not or.
Okay. And I would say, and you're potentially jeopardizing that whole system because you're removing the kids, you're taking staff, there's all these issues, there's all these, there's an impact on the existing system that hasn't been considered. And so I'm not convinced otherwise today. There is definitely an impact on the existing network of people that are providing these services, and it hasn't been, that impact has not been considered by the department, hasn't been considered by the government, even to the point of looking at, well, what's the most cost-effective way to do it? Are we providing it the same service for a better price for families, or are we providing a better service for, so that's not, but that's the case. And then I still can't understand the, we will have the materials, we will have the consultations, we will have. Meanwhile, the class has already started. I don't understand. Why couldn't we start this January 1st? Why are we trying to roll this out in such a rush? It's the bottom line, is it's rushed.
818 children have an opportunity they wouldn't have had we not been ambitious for the children. And the sector has not told us to date that they've been negatively impacted. There's a couple of centres that have called that were concerned about ECEs. We immediately put, to hire ECEs, we immediately put them in contact with Labour and Advanced Education. They were at the ready to be able to move in some of the ECEs in the province that are not currently employed. So that we've covered that off. I believe that we are ready. We are ready to roll this program out.
The 818 children have an opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have. I believe that's the statement you made. Is that a fact? I would believe that some of those 818 children were already in a regulated daycare somewhere. Do you know?
Right. You're right. They may have been.
Right. So some kids might have an opportunity that they might have. How many? Do you know? Again, I'm getting back to the point that this is taking children out of an existing network and putting them in a different structure. So, and I'm still trying to figure out why.
So I'm saying that we have worked with the childcare sector. If they call and there's any concerns, the only concerns we've had is they need to backfill the ECEs because they have children that they need to provide programming for. The concern was I need to hire a new ECE because I have children in my program. So the childcare sector is still functioning. We need to hire ECEs. And we have 818 children in the new pre-primary programming. So that's an abundance, is that there's been spaces opened up so that kids are able to move in, and that we have better services for children across the province.
Okay. Do you know what the average, how much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Houston, you have until 10:20:30, so you have about 4 minutes.
Thank you. Do you know the average cost of childcare in the province? Like, do we have an average number? I guess maybe what I would, if do we have it, or?
Ms. McKenzie?
JL can speak to the average, and we can also provide some information.
If you had to guess, what would the average be, would you think?
Ms. Huntington?
It just depends on the region. So what they charge and what you pay for childcare in downtown Halifax is very different than what you would pay in Cape Breton or Tri-County, for example. So we do have regional averages that we could make available to you.
Yeah, and it's somewhere between probably $500 and $800 maybe a month.
It really does depend on your location.
Yeah, but it's somewhere in there. And then I'm still curious as to how much this is going to cost per child. It's going to be more than that, right?
Ms. McKenzie?
If you would like us to go back and do...
I like that analysis.
Yeah, okay.
I will like that analysis. Thank you. I do want to ask a very specific question about the... are you familiar with the Afrocentric pre-primary in New Glasgow?
We are.
Okay, so that's a program. They had a 4+ program that was the community worked hard for that program.
They did
to identify the need in that community, and they're pretty proud of that program, and they should be. And they're concerned about the intent of the initial program is kind of diluted, I guess, with the pre-primary. They're just concerned about the long-term stability of the Afrocentric pre-primary program. So is the department committed to keeping that program with its initial focus?
There's a long history there. I'm going to turn this over to JL, but there's a long history there in that community, and they're very proud of their the early years program that they had there, the Afrocentric program. The intention is to build on that strong foundation into the future. There would be no intention at all of losing what is a strong history and a great community involvement. But see if JL wants to add to that.
Ms. Huntington?
No, I have nothing else to say around that.
No, thank you. They'll be happy to hear that. Is there any consideration of including busing in the pre-primary? Is that something we can get to?
Ms. McKenzie?
So I believe that we'll be have to look at transportation over the coming years and what the partnerships can be with that. The idea that there's an opportunity there, I would have to look at what the safety standards would be and for transporting small children. But I do think that, as I believe the minister said this the other day, that we will be looking at transportation into the future. I do think that extending the service to wraparound services where we can partner directly in the same setting with private providers for the morning care and the after-school care will help families a great deal. They may be able to drop them off and pick them up because of the extended times. But I do believe we'll be looking at transportation into the future.
Okay. How many families applied that didn't get a spot? So 818 got spots. How many didn't get spots?
I'm going to jail.
Ms. Huntington?
I want to confirm the figure, but I believe it's around 925 families pre-registered for the program.
Okay.
And some of those families registered for they registered for multiple sites and that kind of thing. So I will get you the exact figure, but it's in the 900s.
Thank you. And I know that the minister is still announcing more and more classrooms as we go forward into the future. Do you know how many kids are in? How many 4-year-olds are there in the province? Do we know that number?
It's plus.
Ms. McKenzie?
Sorry, it's plus 9,000.
Over 9,000. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I would be interested in that cost per child thing, so we can figure out what the long-term cost is. But how are you going to measure? We're talking about more and more classrooms, but how are you going to measure whether what we have is a success? Are you going to stop in June and say, did it work?
Order. Time has expired. We'll move back to the NDP Caucus and Ms. Roberts for 14 minutes.
Thank you. A couple just quick facts checks. The minister has frequently quoted the statistic that 75% of the Nova Scotia population doesn't utilize or have access to regulated childcare programs. Of that, is he talking about 4-year-olds, or is he talking about all children up to school age?
Ms. Huntington?
We know that there's enough spaces from birth to 5 for 25% of the children in Nova Scotia.
From birth to 5?
That's correct.
Do you know what percentage of 4-year-olds could be accommodated prior to the pre-primary program?
I don't have that figure with me, no.
Okay. Our education critic wrote to the minister with concerns about the appropriateness of the pre-primary classrooms for children with special needs, and the response we got from the minister was that they would have, the children would have access to the same supports that they would have in regulated childcare. However, the 2016 review of the regulated childcare sector found that those supports were lacking. So can you describe what supports will be in place?
Ms. McKenzie?
Sorry. When the minister responded to that question, he was responding on specifically whether or not they would continue in the pre-primary classes to have access to EIBI, Nova Scotia Hearing and Speech, and other community-based services like early intervention, and they will continue to have access to those when they're in pre-primary. We do know that the survey identified that only a portion of the existing childcare sector had access to the supported childcare grant, and the intention was, and that was recognized that last year that is something that we needed to address, and that has been the subject of our negotiations with the federal government. So there's two sort of elements to your question. Do the existing does the existing childcare sector have full access to the supported childcare grant? No, we have to work on that. But when the minister responded to that question, he was confirming that kids in pre-primary would continue to have access to the same supports they would have in the community, EIBI, early intervention, and Nova Scotia Hearing and Speech.
And so if a parent with a child with special needs who needs ongoing one-on-one support to be in a classroom was interested in taking advantage of the pre-primary program, would that be a possibility?
Ms. Huntington?
We know through the Early Years Centre, and we actually know through pre-primary now, that there are children arriving in the pre-primary program with a special need. They're working with the school board, the pre-primary manager, and the early childhood educator to ensure that the supports are in place to support that child when they arrive. We have also made in the past, and will continue to make in the future, funding available to provide additional support for children in the classroom. So, for example, we know in the Early Years Centre model that in some cases children will arrive with special needs, and what they really struggle with is transition. So we have conversations, our consultants, our early childhood pre-primary consultants will have conversations with the ECEs about what that looks like. So perhaps we need an additional resource in the classroom, not for the full day, but maybe just for transitions, right? So those are, it really is class by class, case by case. I do know of an example, just last week I had a conversation with a school board official who met with a mom who has a child with special needs, and she just said, you know, will my child be welcome in the program? And the school board said, absolutely, your child will be welcome. And so this mom said, we have never experienced that before. How are we going to make sure that my child is successful? And the school board official, along with the ECE, sat down and talked to mom about what they could do in the classroom and how they could support this child. And the mom was overwhelmed and quite pleased that this child was going to have this opportunity. So we support children with special needs every day, and if there's a need to provide additional support, it will be there.
Thank you. The Council to Improve Classroom Conditions recommended creating a universal pre-primary program, including Afrocentric, Mi'kmaq, and other culturally responsive programs. What work has been done with the African, Nova Scotian, and Mi'kmaq communities to engage them in the development of these first pre-primary classrooms this September?
Ms. McKenzie?
We know that we have children from all those communities that have access to pre-primary in the schools. We also have a very well-developed treaty education effort, and we will be extending a look at the supports in the curriculum. I do believe that the play-based curriculum that JL mentioned earlier takes a look at cultural inclusivity, but I do believe that we will also be able to, I believe, work with the schools and in the areas to ensure that the preschool programming is an inclusive environment, that it prepares them for moving into the schools. And if you're asking, have we specifically worked with MK or something of that nature to move kids in, MK already has pre-primary programming that we can learn from and extend it in, just the same as we do with our regular public school programming.
So is there an Afrocentric pre-primary program or pre-primary classroom currently, or could there be one as this program develops?
Ms. Huntington?
So there is an Afrocentric pre-primary program at New Glasgow Academy.
And that's the only one? Could there be others?
Those are conversations that we will absolutely have with boards and work with them to ensure that when the children arrive in their class, that we're supporting the needs of all of them, and that's a great conversation to be having with boards as we plan for the future.
I'd like to explore the change from the early years centers to the pre-primary classrooms, because those early years centers have been in existence, as you mentioned, since 2014. I know that the ratio or the maximum enrollment in those classrooms has gone from 18 to 24. Those sites were transitioned into pre-primary classrooms. What is the impact of that, and what's the rationale for going from 18 to 24?
So we, if we go from 18 to 24, there will be an additional early childhood educator or an additional support in the classroom. So there will not be 2 staff, there will be 3 staff if we're over 20. So in the early years center, and I want to be clear, we know that they provide a great service to families and communities, and we don't want to take that away from the families that rely on those services. So we'll continue to build on the early years center model. Those early years centers will continue to be in place in those communities, and if there is a need, as we build pre-primary into the future, to adopt some of the early years center components, we will look at doing that to meet the needs of families. So it's a great program. We're continuing to evaluate it and learn from it every year and apply the best practices and the lessons to pre-primary. And really, if we need to go and operate an early years center in another community, the evaluation that we're participating in will give us some great insight on how to do that properly.
So are there components of the early years centers in those existing locations that are no longer there with this September rollout?
No.
And what are the components of the early year centers that are not in the new pre-primary classrooms? What are the elements that aren't present?
I'm sorry. So an early year center has 3 components. One is early learning opportunity, so a pre-primary component. The other is family supports. So in some cases it's, family drop-ins, flu clinics, those kinds of things can happen at an early year center. And the third component is regulated childcare when required. So we know through the evaluation that in some communities they needed regulated childcare, and we were able to, the school board was able to partner with community childcare providers to provide that service. But in some communities, regulated childcare was not required. So there's 3 components of an early year center, and in many cases we know every early year center has used the early learning component. They've all used the family resources and supports, and some early year centers have explored the option of using regulated childcare to provide that wraparound service, and some have chosen not to.
And so with the pre-primary program, will there be an element of family support, or is it very much drop-off, pick-up?
No, and it won't be. The interaction between early childhood educators and parents is really important in a pre-primary setting. So families will be welcomed into the pre-primary environment. They will be encouraged to have ongoing conversations with early childhood educators about their child's development. And so it's this is not school, so there's no report card, there's no teacher report card day. This is ongoing, daily family to early childhood education interaction. So, and early childhood educators know their community and they know what supports are available. So I would imagine if a family is in crisis, and we are hearing this now happening in one particular school board where a family identified, came to the pre-primary program, and the pre-primary manager and the early childhood educator recognized that there was some other things going on with the family, and was able to provide information to that family about where they could get some assistance. So that happens all the time, and will continue to happen in a pre-primary program or in an early years center.
So what was the plan for the expansion of the early years centers before we shifted gears and moved to the pre-primary?
We were planning on expanding early years centers by adding 4 new to the province, so to bring it from 8 to 12.
Okay, and so instead of 12, we went to 50 some. Did we lose? What did we lose with going with volume instead of the smaller? The smaller rollout?
We didn't lose anything. We are able to, excuse me, to provide more access to families in 52 communities.
Okay. What how do you hope things will look different in September 2018? What will be the difference between September 2017 and September 2018 in terms of the pre-primary program?
So there will be more pre-primary programs. We're going to be again, always looking at what we learned this year and how quickly we roll this out to make sure that we continue to improve on the services that we provide to families. So we'll be having conversations with the pre-primary managers. We're already learning. We had the pre-primary managers from the board into a meeting last week in Halifax, and we met for the day. And, you know, one of the managers say, I'm really struggling with this in my board, and I don't know how to, you know, to move forward. And then another manager will come to the table and say, oh, this is what we're doing. So they're problem solving all the time. We really want to build the network of early childhood educators. We want them to, if you're an ECE working at one school and you have a lead ECE or a support ECE and you've got some great experiences, we want you to share those experiences with the ECE at the other schools in your community. So really building the relationships between the managers and the early childhood educators. We also know that we need to ensure that families feel supported. Having conversations with families about play-based curriculum and play-based learning is going to be really important over the next year. Families are concerned that their 4-year-olds are going to be sitting in desks doing math, and it's up to us to make sure that they know that they're going to be learning through play. So we have a really important job over the next year to make sure that families know and understand what a play-based curriculum looks like and how it can help their children learn and grow. We'll absolutely be doing that. And again, just learning lessons from this year. We are in year 3 of the early year center evaluation, and the lessons that we've learned have been tremendous, and we've acted on them, and we've incorporated them into the implementation of pre-primary. So this is going to be, you know, a challenging year, as the last 16 weeks have been challenging, but it's so rewarding when we know that over 800 families are able to access the support from families and for their children, and having those conversations with mums and dads about what this means to them makes it all worthwhile.
Order. Time has expired. We'll move to Mr. Jessam of the Liberal Caucus for 14 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to begin by, I guess, acknowledging the work of the Council to improve classroom conditions as kind of a launching pad for this endeavor. You know, it's been made clear in some of the work that they've done in Deputy, some of the work that you've been a part of, that this universal pre-primary will provide an opportunity for students in preparation for primary and you know, later in life as well. So I think that's important to acknowledge in framing this discussion. Secondly, and it's clear that there's a tremendous amount of passion for these young kids and for the opportunity to create this universal program at the department, at the board, amongst educators. And, you know, I don't know if it was expressed, but acknowledging that you were given a tight timeline to do this. It sounds like the motivation was there for completely genuine and eager means to kick this off. But I think that, you know, regardless of some of the questions that perhaps have been asked today, hats off to you for taking this on and for, you know, the work that you're going to continue to do over the next little while. So thank you. Some of the questions that I have are in regards to what opportunities are there for, I guess, the private sector to commingle with this public endeavor, and how do you see the consultation rolling out between the department and private sector?
Ms. McKenzie?
So I believe that JL can respond to that. We do see that there's an opportunity here for the private sector to offer both wraparound service services through the summer, March break, and what have you. We see this as an opportunity to work together. If Mr. Jessam is okay with this, I do have an answer to Mr. Houston's question earlier that we were going to have to go back, but we like to be real-time responsive here. So we're going to be able to respond to a question that was raised. You asked us to compare something. We do programming for pre-primary and by child for childcare. We took the 125,000 for the class, divided it by the average of 20 students. It would be obviously up to 24 by 195 days, and came out to $32 a day. Now that would be slightly lower if there was 24 children in the class, and that's comparable to the average across Nova Scotia of $33 a day for preschool in childcare. Of course, in some areas that would be slightly higher, in some areas that would be slightly lower. That's the average. So the average is $32 a day with 20 students, knowing that it can be higher, and the average for the childcare sector is $33 a day. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to JL to answer the rest of your question.
Thank you.
Ms. Huntington?
I believe you answered the question. I wouldn't have anything else to add other than the consultation will give us some great information on what the childcare sector requires and what they need from government to be successful in the future. So we're really anxious to get that consultation underway. I was really, Vicki and I were really fortunate to meet with representatives from the childcare sector just last week. We met for 4 hours and we went through what we planned for the consultation line by line, and they provided incredible feedback to us. They were pleased with the meeting. We were pleased that they were able to give us so much time. I know that they're under a lot of, September is a busy time for regulated childcare in Nova Scotia. So line by line, they gave us great advice and feedback that we're incorporating now so that we can ensure that the success of the consultation. We really want this consultation to be as meaningful for them as it is for us. And I think that they provided feedback to us last week to make sure that that happened. So we're really pleased with the outcome of that meeting.
Okay, thank you. And just quickly here, I know my colleague wants to ask a question here. I guess what opportunities are there for ECEs as a whole in the context of, are there unemployed ECEs looking for opportunities in the field in Nova Scotia?
Ms. McKenzie?
Our labour market information would say yes, and of course we'll continue to work with our training providers, but I can let Vicki respond to this.
Ms. Elliott Lopez.
Thank you. So according to our database, we have 2,400 people registered to be an ECE, certified. And when we look at the regulated childcare sector, we have about 1,300 of those working in the sector. We've heard from the childcare sector that since the 1990s, recruitment's been an issue, and they've cited wages as being one of the primary issues. Well, as a result of the action plan of 2016, we've actually implemented a new wage floor. And so previously, the average wage was under $13 an hour. Now we know that it's $15, $17, and $19 an hour. And so we believe that that will actually help to draw people back into the sector to work and provide them with great opportunities to work in the field. We've anecdotally heard that enrollment is up at training institutions. I think word's getting out that this is a sector that people want to work in. So we're very confident that we'll continue to have a strong labor supply going forward.
Thank you.
I am sorry, I was just making some notes. We'll go to Mr. Gordon Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a problem. Thank you very much. It's interesting. A lot of conversation around why didn't we wait. I come from a rural community that. Thank you very much. One of the early rolled out is in the Weymouth area, which is certainly an area that has never had access to this type of service. An impoverished area, an area that struggled educationally. The EDIs are very low, and I just would like to have two questions answered. One is, what role does this play in breaking the poverty cycle that we see certainly in areas in rural Nova Scotia? And secondly, how comfortable are you that the product that you've rolled out is ready?
Ms. McKenzie?
I am confident that this will contribute to evening the playing field for children that live in poverty in Nova Scotia by giving them access to programming that will prepare them to enter school on an even level with the children that may have had access to more material resources in their lives. So I'm confident that this is going to be a huge contribution to that. And we know, and JL I'm going to pass it over to her because she has research that's come out of Ontario that said that pre-primary has had a greater impact for children with more socioeconomic disparity than it's had right across the board. To your second question, we are prepared, we are ready, the programs are high quality, we have a lot of confidence in the people that are rolling them out, and we're very proud of the program. Do you want to just recite the research?
Ms. Huntington?
So there's, I mean, I think the deputy spoke to it. There's lots of research that speaks to why a pre-primary program will have a positive impact on children socially and emotionally and academically. In Ontario, by grade 2, those children that attended full-day kindergarten were able to better self-regulate than those children that didn't attend full-day kindergarten. We know they looked at math and literacy scores in grade 3 of children that attended full-day kindergarten and children that did not, and those children scored better in their academic assessments. We know there's an extensive sort of longitudinal research from the United Kingdom that points to significant academic and social emotional benefits for every year of preschool before entry to kindergarten. And I'm going to refer to PISA, the results of PISA from 2015. And so children who attended early childhood education for at least 2 years, so that would be pre-primary and primary, perform an average better than other children by the age of 15. And that's really powerful evidence. And to the deputy's point about us being ready, we have been doing this since 2014 with our early year centers. We have a great high quality model. Early learning opportunities have existed in many schools for decades. We are comfortable and confident that we're providing the best opportunity for these children now and in the future. And if you can indulge me for 1 minute, I'd like to talk about a conversation that I had with a principal who has a pre-primary program in their school, who indicated to me that there's a couple of children that arrived at the pre-primary program that have been undiagnosed, or the early childhood educators believe that they may have a special need that needs to be explored. So that principal said to me at that time, when I spoke to her, that if those children are able to get the supports they need this year, before they get to school, the program is worth its weight in gold.
Thank you. I hadn't heard it asked today, but I do know that out in the communities, occasionally you'll hear, our kids are going to school too early. We're putting them in that school environment at a younger age, and they question, okay, now we're putting them there earlier. Ms. McKenzie, can you give me your comments on that?
Ms. McKenzie?
This is a play-filled environment. They're not in school per se. They may be attending a school. We know that childcare centers are located in schools around the province. These are play-based programming. They are there to play with their peers, have opportunities to explore and do things that they may not otherwise have had. And I would say that there's a separate conversation about whether kids are starting school too early, and some people point to other jurisdictions where they start later. This is a play-based programming that will give them success in school. It's my feeling that as they move in, they'll be more successful, and I think that it's exactly what Nova Scotians believe, that they want to see the best efforts being made for our smallest citizens.
Mr. Wilson, I believe Mr. Horn has a question as well. I'll let you decide.
Yes, no problem. I'll defer to Mr. Horn.
Okay, Mr. Horn.
Well, thank you. Your question was asked by Mr. Wilson here. You just answered a few minutes ago, so I'm quite pleased. I must show or say that see the enthusiasm from for this program by you folks, and I have to say it's long needed and long time coming, but what really bothers me is the statistics you used, about 25% only. This is going to challenge 25% of the children in that age group. I know you're going to continue the program over a 4-year period to have all of the province covered. Will that help to change that statistic?
Ms. McKenzie?
We believe that the rollout of universal pre-primary in Nova Scotia will go a long way to addressing the early childhood indicators, early development indicators that we mentioned earlier. But because we've been doing, we have we have 2 years worth of data now that we will have that to as a comparison and be able to do a strong evaluation for the pre-primary program, and I feel confident now. I know that I won't be here in the future to look at it, but I'll be watching from my seat in the citizenry, and I'm confident that we will see very positive changes in our EDI scores entering grade primary.
Order. Time has expired for questions. I want to give Ms. McKenzie a chance to provide some closing comments.
Thank you very much. We are enthusiastic about this program. Childcare moved to the Department of Education actually had moved there the year that I arrived. I think it was 2013, 2014 when it moved over. It was exactly the right place to bring childcare. This allows us now to put a continuum in place for our youngest citizens, and I'm very, very excited. You see the enthusiasm. The people that are working in our childcare division, it's been a long dream for them to have universal pre-primary, and we'll be enthusiastic about this till a long time into the future, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKenzie, and thank your colleagues as well for attending today and answering our questions. Mr. Wilson, Mr. Gordon Wilson, I believe you had something you wanted to say.
Yes, I certainly, seeing that this is probably your last public accounts session here, I certainly, on behalf of myself, and I would also assume for all my colleagues, you've had a very broad service in this government for many years with many political parties. You've brought forward an awful lot of tremendous initiatives. You've had some challenging years. You've served us extremely well, and I truly do want to thank you. I hope this isn't an emotional moment for you for your last public accounts, but in a lot of, yeah, we'll try and get you back. But truly, I do want to thank you very much for everything you've done for this province.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, and thank you, Ms. McKenzie. Our next meeting will be October 4th with the Auditor General, and that will be to discuss the October 2017 report of the Auditor General. Are there any questions or further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.